express my reservations about many of the changes that the National Assembly has made to the 2022 executive budget proposal. Some of the worrisome changes are as follows. A, increase in projected federal government independent revenue by 400 billion naira, the justification for which is yet to be provided to the executive. B, reduction in the provision for sinking fund to retire maturing bonds by 22 billion naira without any explanation. C, reduction of the provisions of the non-regular allowances of the Nigeria Police Force and the Nigerian Navy by 15 billion naira and 5 billion naira respectively. This is particularly worrisome because personnel cost provisions are based on agencies' nominal role and approved salaries and allowances. D, furthermore, an increase of 21.72 billion naira in the overhead budget of some MDAs, while the sum of 1.96 billion naira was cut from the provision for some MDAs without apparent justification. E, increase in the provision for capital spending, excluding capital share and statutory transfer, by a net amount of 575.63 billion naira from 4.89 trillion naira to 5.47 trillion naira. Nonetheless, provisions for some critical projects were reduced. These include 1. Reduction of 12.6 billion naira in the Ministry of Transport's budget for the ongoing rail modernization projects. 2. Reduction of 25.8 billion naira from power sector reform program under the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. And 3. Reduction of 14.5 billion naira from several projects of the Ministry of Agriculture and introducing over 1,500 new projects into the budget of this ministry and its agencies. F, inclusion of new provisions totaling 36.59 billion naira for National Assembly's projects in the service-wide vote, which negates the principle of separation of powers and financial autonomy of the legislative arm of government. G, the changes to the original executive proposal are in the form of new insertions, outright removals, reductions, and or increases in the amounts allocated to projects. I, provisions made for as many as 10,733 projects were reduced, while 6,576 new projects were introduced into the budget by the National Assembly. Reduction in the provisions for many strategic capital projects to introduce empowerment projects. The cuts in the provisions for several of these projects by the National Assembly may render the projects unimplementable or set back their completion, especially some of this administration's strategic capital projects. Most of the projects inserted relate to matters that are basically the responsibilities of state and local governments and do not appear to have been properly conceptualized, designed, and costed. Many more projects have been added to the budgets of some MDAs with no consideration for the institutional capacity to execute the additional projects and or for the incremental recurrent expenditure that may be required. It is surprising that despite the National Assembly increasing projected revenues by 609.27 billion naira, the additional executive request of 186.53 billion naira for critical expenditure items could not be accommodated without increasing the deficit, while the sum of 550.59 billion naira from the projected incremental revenues was allocated at the discretion of National Assembly. I signed the 2022 Appropriation Bill into law to enable its implementation to commence on the 1st of January 2022. However, I will revert to the National Assembly with a request for amendment and or amendment as soon as the Assembly resumes to ensure that critical ongoing projects that are cardinal to this administration and those nearing completion do not suffer a setback due to reduced funding.